Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I am your host, Greg Elfring, the head of marketing here at Empire Flippers, and today we are talking to Paul Rafelson. So Paul is an M&A lawyer who has done a ton of deals. I think he's done over $200 million worth of deals, something like that. And he's done a lot of deals using us as well. So our customers some of you might already know Paul. Paul specializes in being a lawyer for Amazon FBA sellers. He's done a bunch of interesting stuff. We talk about the Amazon Nexus tax issue, why this is such a massive headache, and how things are so out of date. We also talk briefly about whether Amazon might break up or not. Do they actually compete with their sellers with the Amazon Basics program? And what does that mean? We also, towards the end, if you're interested more in how to sell your FBA business, of legal traps to watch out for and negotiation tips, at the very end, Paul and I talk about that, as well as some of the things you really need to be careful on, especially if you are a seller that is looking to be bought by an aggregator. So I had a really fun time talking with Paul, extremely knowledgeable guy, and all of his contact details will be at the end. So with that said, let's dive into the podcast, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, I got Paul Rafelson here, and I totally forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is that correct, Rafelson?
Actually is correct. I've kind of like pivoted towards Rafelson. I kind of like it better. Everyone uses it my whole life. I've pivoted. I've almost just pivoted and accepted it. Maybe my daughter uses it. My wife uses it. She's European. So like, it's like with her accent. But actually, technically, you're correct. So
Well,
that's
I'm
perfectly fine.
happy. I'm happy to be correct on that. Everyone always messes up my last name. They call me El Frank, but there's no A in
Yeah.
my last name. But I don't get it. But yeah, so I'm with you.
Yeah, it just
uh,
is. Yeah.
so tell us where you're at in the world right now, man.
So I'm sitting here in suburban New York City actually at the moment. I have a law firm that is primarily based out of Florida, Boca Raton, but we have lawyers all over the place. And I kind of, spend a lot of time up north and a lot of time in the south and just wherever. And of course, all the Amazon event traveling and whatnot there is to do. So, but right now, just here in the cozy New York suburbs where it's freezing cold.
Awesome. My wife, she just got the USA visa, so we're thinking about actually going to New York. She's Vietnamese, so this will be our first time
Oh, cool.
going.
Congratulations.
But yeah, we might go hang out there, but it might be a little bit too cold for her. I'm from Alaska, so it's cool with me, but she
Oh,
might
yeah.
become an ice cube. We'll see.
Yeah, I should. It's probably like the t-shirt weather out here right now. Then I
Yeah.
probably shouldn't say anything, right? Well, you'll have to let me
No,
know. We'll have to definitely grab lunch or dinner. I'd love to. It's always cool with people in town. It's an easy train ride into the city, so
for
that'd be
sure,
really
for
cool.
sure.
I
Yeah,
used to
that'd be
live in
awesome.
Bellevue, Washington. I never made it. That's my biggest regret is I never made it to Alaska. I wanted to take the public ferry, the one that takes like 24 hours. Thought that'd be a fun adventure, but never did.
Yes. You should come. It's not too late. You're still young enough. Come
Yeah,
enjoy
yeah,
the brutal
I'll get
winter
there
in
eventually. But
Florida.
when you're right there, it's a short flight on Alaska. Or you have all these different options, and you never did it. You're kind of like,
When I
I wasn't
used
planning on leaving.
when I used to work in the oil field, we would go down to Seattle on our days off to go hang out down there. So yeah, I get you. A lot of Seattle time
Yeah,
underneath my belt. Let's get into your origin story here. Before we hopped onto this podcast, you were talking about all the massive amount of deals you've done in the FBA space, helping sellers, a lot selling to the aggregators during the aggregator boom, and probably outside of aggregators as well. But before we get into how you became an Amazon lawyer, you were telling me a pretty interesting story of kind of your origin of how you got into this. So talk to me about how you became a
yeah.
lawyer and got into the space in the first place.
I graduated college as an accountant in 2001, and that's a terrible time to graduate in finance. I worked for Merrill Lynch for a lot of reasons. Quickly realized I didn't really like it, and I actually failed the CPA exam. But in all fairness, it's a very tough exam to pass the first time, so it's not like wasn't really expecting to pass it anyway. But I just kind of lost interest in accounting very quickly, and I've always had my eye on being a lawyer, and so I just kind of called it quits. In my very short-lived career in finance at Merrill Lynch, I worked from June till end of December, and just kind of took time off until law school started the following fall. And while I was in law school, I was actually an Amazon seller. People don't realize that I was not just an Amazon, I was an e-commerce seller. I was flipping. I was buying DVDs and whatever I could get my hands on and just flipping it on the internet. And they didn't call. I think they call it. Well, I know they call it retail arbitrage now because we help a lot of people who do it for a living professionally. But back then, I don't know. It was just hustling, scamming. Some people said I was scamming. I didn't really see the scam. I'm like, I am buying it. I'm like, I'm not getting it from the back of a truck. I mean, I am paying for it. I'm just selling it for more than I paid for it because I figured out ways to like game the system and get really good deals, and and nothing illegal, but just I don't know. People just don't like when you're successful. They don't like
that
when you're
is
doing
a
things.
that is a very tough hustle, I find. Maybe you have a different opinion on it, but I have had a lot of friends who've done retail arbitrage before it was called retail arbitrage. I had a different name for a while that was like one of those really sexy internet marketing guru sell you a course kind of name.
I
Like
don't even
a
know what
lot of
that
my
was called.
yeah, a lot of my friends got into it, and a few of them were pretty successful. But the hustle of going to all the stores and getting all the gear, all the product to find the good deals, like at scale, it becomes pretty hard. But you did this to pay your way through college.
Yeah, it's total scale. Like, I mean, first few years, like Amazon wasn't even one of my stores because they didn't sell. It was just
Mm.
books, right? So like DVDs really only got
Oh yeah.
famous. It
So when was this? This must have been like
was
2002
like
then,
oh
two
three
thousand
oh
three.
four. I graduated law school in '05, so we're talking like oh 03, oh 04, oh 05, like
Wow,
that time period. Then
the
a little bit,
granddaddy.
and I kind of kept it going as a side hustle, even when I had time. So it was kind of fun. I had my wife doing it. My wife was originally from another country too, actually. So when we first went to my first law job and I was working in Miami and she was not working, I mean, she was helping me do the side hustle, helping her source and she was getting inventory out the door. So she was helping us push it through.
That is
So I
awesome.
kept it going for a little bit longer than law school, and then I do it from time and again. Like even to this day, I can't go to Walmart without walking through the clearance aisle with my iPhone. Like it drives my family crazy. Like, I just can't
I,
help it. I can't.
I have a similar issue. So my background is SEO and content marketing, and SEOs are always looking for a good niche. So whenever I walk into any retail store, like office chairs with low height, I wonder if that's a niche. So I just like open up my keyword tools, started doing like random searches, just like no intent of actually even starting something. I'm just like curious, what's the search volume on this thing?
Right, your brain just starts firing off ideas, and you're like, I wonder. It's like that. I wonder, right? It's just I wonder.
Right.
I wonder what's on. So anyway, I did that on Amazon. Under no circumstances did I ever think that there was any money to be made. Like no way was I thinking like I'm gonna not be a lawyer for this business. Like there just wasn't enough scalability, right? Because scale didn't really come until fulfillment by Amazon. FBA was the game changer. We learned that through a lot of my clients' stories and how they made it big and sold their business. Like, FBA, for those who were selling, pre 2008, 9, 10, 11, I mean, really what's what kind of when they're piloting it, they'll tell you that's the pivotal moment, right? That's when they went from being like trying to make it to like, holy crap, this is a real business. This is viable. This is real, right? Amazon has just scaled my business a million X, right? I'm exaggerating. So it wasn't a million X, but you get the
Well,
point.
in certain cases, you're not. I definitely know friends who had absolutely nothing, and then now they're millionaires from FBA over a few
Right,
years.
right. It's got a lifestyle of a million X. Maybe that's what I should have
Yeah,
said. Right.
yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
But it was. I mean, FBA, fulfillment by Amazon, what I told Congress was the e-commerce railroad, which they liked that. They borrowed that from me. They like to use that when they're antitrust investigation. Yeah, I mean, that was it. That was the game changer. That's what took Amazon to the next level, was building out the FBA network. So not knowing that that was a thing in 2004, 2005, graduating law school in five, I just kind of went back to being, okay, I'm going to be a boring old lawyer now, doing corporate tax and litigation and some M&A and just boring transactional blah blah blah. It's just like a whole mix of nonsense. But I worked for some really cool companies. So I worked for Microsoft. They actually recruited me out of Florida and asked me to come to Seattle, which I thought was the coolest thing ever because I'm a gamer dork at heart. So I really loved the idea of working for the company that makes Xbox and actually Flight Simulator. Those guys are my heroes, and I ended up working next door to them and hanging out with them, which was a lot of fun. Then after a number of years, it kind of got sad there, and Walmart had been knocking on my door a couple times, and they finally convinced me to come out and at least interview and see what Bentonville looked like. And I was at a phase of my life where I didn't mind living in Arkansas. It looked like New Jersey, where I grew up, like without the big city. It just looked like a suburb, right? Which is what
Mhm.
New Jersey is, just a giant suburb with two big cities attached to it, New York and Philadelphia. And so it reminded me of where I grew up, and I was kind of at that stage. And it was interesting for me as a young lawyer to go from big tech to big retail, especially big retail that was interested in tech. So it was kind of like bringing my tech brain to retail, like the cards lined up, and they paid well, right? Walmart gives you what's called like hazard pay, right? Because like even though it's a lot cheaper to live in Bentonville, Arkansas than it is to live in Washington, they have to incentivize you to move to Arkansas. So like they pay you well. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to throw down on the cable bill and just live the life here, right? Buy a house, the whole thing. So it was a nice life. And then after that, I got recruited to go to General Electric. And I wasn't actually eager to go to GE. They called me the day I bought my house in Arkansas and said, "Do you want to come up and work for us?" But getting called to work for GE, it's like getting called when you're in corporate law and tax and all those things. Like you're basically like it's like being called up to play for the Yankees, which I'm not a Yankees fan, but that's the you get the point. So I had to go. I felt like I had no choice, and so we moved back east to the Northeast, and I was at GE for a number of years until they decided they wanted to move to Boston. And I kind of was, this is after joining GE, just tearing the company apart. Like the company used to own, people don't know this, like each Universal, NBC Universal, like Universal Studios and Saturday Night Live and NBC, like they got rid of that, sold that to Comcast. Most of the company's profit came from their financial arm, their credit card business, their private label credit card business, which you get, GE Capital credit cards when you get a Walmart card or a Lumber Liquidators card. It's really GE Capital. Spun that off to Synchrony, created Synchrony, spun that off, sold off pretty much their entire financial portfolio. And basically all that was left of GE by the time 2017 rolled around, the manufacturing of spinning things, so jet engines and turbines and whatnot. So it wasn't quite the company I had joined. So that was kind of where the end of the road of GE was for me, where it's like I had options, but I wasn't interested. So I just took a life break. And that's kind of where I ended up becoming an Amazon lawyer by accident, because while I was trying a few other things and considering a few other options, in 2017, I think it was around September, they went after a bunch of Amazon sellers for taxes based on some bogus constitutional law theories that were totally wrong. And I teach a common law class in New York on taxes. I teach a constitutional state tax course. And I just kind of called Bravo Sierra on that. I wrote a blog post for an Amazon consultant about it, and that blog post snowballed into an entire law practice. It just woke it all up. I had no idea that there was
Content
this
marketing
industry out there.
101. That's amazing.
Yeah, right. Just, hey, Paul, and this particular consultant used to work with my wife in Amazon seller performance team. So there's the connection, right? My wife actually worked for seller performance, right? Like it wasn't a glamorous job. It was like a $25 an hour job. My wife's Polish, but she speaks some German, and they needed her for Amazon Germany. So I just so happened I used to hang out with the Amazon seller performance team because they were kind of more our age than my Microsoft friends. So when I lived in Seattle, I always hang out with them, and I love listening in on their conversations because I was still like I said, I was still a side hustle seller. So I still love getting a little bit of the inside baseball. But this particular person they knew my background, they knew what I did, they understood the nature of the issue, and they came to me and asked me if I'd write a blog post, and that blew up. And but what started as a blog post in 2017 turned us into a law firm empire, to borrow from you guys.
I want to go into some of that stuff there. 2017, great time to get in because I feel like that was when FBA was still a bit nascent and just was starting to come
Mm-hmm.
into its own, at least in the M&A side of things. I remember back in
Absolutely on the
2016,
M&A side of things.
yeah, because we started selling them pretty significantly. I want to say like towards the last half of 2016 or beginning of 2017. And we were so early in it, the Amazon customer service reps, they're like, no, you can't sell accounts. Like, no, we're selling the business. Like, you can't sell account. Like, all right, let me talk to your manager. And then we had to like go up all these different echelons of power to finally we found someone who understood. Like, wow, yeah, of course you can do this. Like no one knew
Yeah,
back then. I want to talk about the tax thing you mentioned because that was one of the questions I have on this list, and then I want to go into some of the other common problems that FBA sellers can get into in the legal jungle, so to speak. So
yeah.
describe that tax issue that prompted you to write the blog post. Like, what was that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So yeah, in 2017, anyone starting in 2017 was late to the game. That was the story I heard from my new clients. Like, oh my God, these are all, they're thinning the herd. Every year it was they're thinning the herd, and it's going to get harder and harder to sell on Amazon. Yet I can tell you, many of my clients who sold for big bucks last year and this year did not start their businesses until like 2018, 2019. So that was always, but back then it was like you had to be in the game in 2012, right? 2012 was kind of when Amazon first put its warehouses in California, and California started going after sellers for sales tax. So the idea was, you made all these sales on Amazon and you never collected sales tax because you didn't live in California. And you said, well, yeah, I'm not supposed to. I don't live in California. And California would say, well, technically you have a physical presence in our state because Amazon puts your inventory here. And people are like, say what now? So here we are in 2017. You've done millions in sales for the last 5 years. All right, 10 to 15% of which are in California, right? So let's say you did $10 million in sales, and for the last 5, 6 years, let's say 10% of that is in California, so that's $1 million, and you didn't collect sales tax. That's 7.5%. So now you have $75,000 plus interest and penalty. So it's like 150. So people are getting some substantial tax bills, right?
Is this related
And
to, was California thinking they were in the right because of Nexus, something like that? Was that
yeah,
their
so the idea
buying
was because
behavior?
Amazon, so when we use FBA, right? So like let's say I'm living in New Jersey, I send my inventory to a New Jersey warehouse, the inventory ends up all over the country, including California, and they're saying that your inventory ending up in the California warehouse constitutes nexus for purposes of the tax law, right? And so then you had like TaxJar and Avalara, and they were pushing their agenda. You need to sign up and register in every state. But that was the idea. And it wasn't just California. What also happened in 2017 is a bunch of states saw what California was doing, like, oh, this is a great idea. Let's create an amnesty around this. Let's convince people that we'll waive the sales tax that they owe if they register. And like 25 states got together and came up with this genius idea of like granting you amnesty for all back taxes. All you have to do is register your business to collect sales tax going forward on Amazon and other platforms in our state, as well as pay income tax. And the companies I'm dealing with, these are not companies that are making big bucks here. Like a company selling $1 million on Amazon in 2017, lucky if they're making 80 grand, right? I mean,
Right.
they're not making big mega bucks because a lot of these businesses were not private label. They were traditionally wholesale. They were resellers. Private label still really hadn't come into its own. There were a few. I mean, there were definitely some, but I mean, it wasn't as big at that time. So, the margins were really, really tight on these businesses. And I remember people were like, where am I getting to get this money from? Like, this is my entire year. Like, I'll never pay this. But that was sort of the message. The message was that if you sell at Amazon, you have to register in every state where Amazon has a warehouse. And we thought,
Man,
oh, that's constitutionally insanity. That's
that
that's that's
is
false for a number of reasons. And I even told the
that
Supreme
is so
Court,
wild.
yeah. So I even told the Supreme Court, I wrote an amicus brief in the Wayfair case, which you can read. It's written by the Online Merchants Guild. We started a nonprofit to like advocate for Amazon sellers, and it's actually still active. We just won a case on this Nexus issue actually in Pennsylvania like a couple of weeks ago, where the court agreed with us and said, yeah, just the mere presence of inventory that Amazon puts in Pennsylvania does not create like tax nexus for you under the federal constitution. So we're still fighting it. It's crazy. After all these years, we're still fighting it. But that was it. That was the chaos. The sad part was I was kind of like, yes, I had a lot of tax background, but I sort of became like, what's the word in the movie business? I was like typecasted. I was typecasted as a tax lawyer.
Stereotype, yeah, typecasting, yeah.
Yeah, people be like, I didn't know you could help me with this intellectual property issue. And I'm like, yeah, I can. I'm like, it's not hard. Like, we do a lot of this stuff. I know you can help me with this LLC formation. I'm like, it's not complicated. Like, I mean, what I realized is like, there was our law firm, what we built our law firm is on the idea is like, look, we need to be good at a lot of things that anything that an Amazon seller would typically need, but we don't have to be like the greatest. Like we don't need to be like level 10 corporations experts, right? Like we're not forming, the structures of GE, right? We're not going to have like Caymanian partnerships, nestled into Irish ham sandwiches. You can Google what that is and how Google used that to dodge taxes. Literally, like Irish Dutch sandwich. Google that if you know what I'm talking about. Stuff we used to deal with when I was in Microsoft. Like we don't need that. We don't need to know that. We need to be at a certain level for our clients. But what we did do, and I think we did really well as law firms, we diagnosed who our clients are. Our clients are the first ever global small businesses. There was never like the concept of a global small business was an oxymoron until Amazon came around, really, right? You could argue maybe eBay, but until e-commerce, right? How could you really be a global small business, right? Importing from China, selling in interstate commerce, selling in multiple countries, right? How could you do that without, like, as a small business, all from your kitchen table? It was impossible. It would never be possible prior to e-commerce. So we realized, like, hey, there are these global small businesses out there, this whole crop of them that Amazon kind of created, and other e-commerce platforms to some extent as well, and nobody's serving them, right? Everybody was serving suspension. Everyone's like, if your account gets suspended, I'm like, yeah, that's tiring. We can do that too, but I'm like, that's exhausting. I'm like, enough competition, right? I'm the Amazon suspension. Okay, but can you form an LLC and can you explain to a person why it's important to actually, like, not use a template and do it the right way, especially if you're going to have a partner, like you're going to business with somebody else, like why it's important to have a conversation about what the LLC operating agreement is about, and not just some entity mill from the internet for $30. Like, can you have that conversation? Nobody was having that conversation. Can you explain, like, the
I,
basics of just so many different things we're missing
I
from this
like what you're
topic?
saying there because I think a lot of people way overcomplicate almost every aspect of this. I like the terminology of small global business or global small business. I think that's perfect. It's very similar in a sense with marketing funnels. I see this as a marketer all the time. People with these like insanely complex things is like, look, man, you're a local dentist. You do not need this lead nurturing campaign. Like, just get an ad, run
Right.
up, or whatever. Like the same with my affiliate friends. Sometimes even with my e-commerce friends. I agree with you. I think e-commerce and internet in general has ushered in this whole new era. Before we get off of the Amazon tax thing, well, I mean, going into some other issues, what are some other common problems that people are facing? You mentioned suspensions, LLCs, but is there anything that's like even more Amazon specific that sellers need legal help with?
I mean, there's always something, right? I mean, there's sourcing issues, right? I mean, like Amazon. So what's interesting is you have to take a look at some of the history of Amazon, and this is sort of like, I don't want to tell this long story version of this. We'll try to do this quickly, but if you understand the history of Amazon and like how sales tax is a perfect example of this, like Amazon kind of got away with a lot of things early on because it was like technologically 10 steps ahead of the government, right? Like if you think about our government asking Zuckerberg, how do you make money on Facebook when you don't even charge for it, right? And you're like, that
Sign of the
government is in charge
times.
of, right? Right? We run ad, Senator. Remember that? And you think about, like, those are the people in charge of regulating Amazon. And Amazon was miles ahead of state and federal regulators. So they did a really good job early on in saying, okay, we don't collect the sales tax because we're not a store. Absolutely. That was the most ridiculous thing about the sales tax issue, was that regardless of nexus, like in our position, Amazon was 100% a store. And now they actually admit it. They actually tell Congress they are a store because for antitrust purposes, it works out to their favor, right? But back in 2012 and 2013, Amazon didn't want to be a store. They didn't want to be a store because they didn't want to be responsible for the products being sold on their platform. And they didn't want to be responsible not just for the taxes, but what if the product hurts somebody, right? What
Right.
if the dog collar blinded somebody? This is a true case, right? It's called the Oberdorf case in Pennsylvania. You can look
A
this
dog
up.
collar blinding someone?
Yeah, like a piece of the dog collar broke off and blinded this woman in one eye. It
Wow.
was the Oberdorf case, right? And they sued. This was the first case. And prior to that case, whenever you would sue Amazon, like, because typically when you buy a product at the store, like you go to your local Walmart and buy a product and it hurts you, like you can sue Walmart 100%, even if it wasn't their fault. Like they just, hey, look, we just put it on our shelves, right? We have this concept called strict liability in America, and the idea of that is like, because what if the seller's in China and unreachable? Somebody has to be accountable, right? And then
Mm.
Walmart, to the extent they would want to go and get their money from the China-based seller, they could do that, and that's the whole idea of strict liability. But Amazon created this fiction: hey, we're just this online flea market, and that worked for them until the courts started to catch up. And the courts are always 5 or 6 years behind the regulators, right? Because then, the first court case came in, and the court's like, well, Amazon wasn't really well argued. And they said, well, Amazon's a flea market. We don't hold flea markets accountable for when hoverboards catch on fire and burn your house down. Another true case in Kentucky, right? But over time, as the arguments got more and more sophisticated, like the arguments we would make about the tax law, Amazon's accountability threshold came down tremendously. So suddenly Amazon realizes, okay, we're actually on the hook for this stuff. Okay, so now if a product is sold that's not subject to FDA regulation, like if somebody's selling an FDA regulated product that isn't compliant, Amazon can be held accountable. So now we're seeing, to answer your question, yes, there's a ton of things you need to worry about when you sell on Amazon. There's FDA regulation, FTC regulation, Federal Trade Commission, right? There's Consumer Product Safety Commission. I mean, the list goes on, right?
What
Intellectual property, right?
what is an example of FTC with FBA?
Claims. What do you claim your product does, right?
Oh, yes,
The whole review
yes.
issue was all driven by FTC.
Yes, you're right. Whenever I
All.
think of FTC, I just immediately go to like financial crimes.
Oh no,
But
no,
yes, I
no.
absolutely 100%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The whole reason Amazon, is like on a review frenzy is because basically they're being told you are accountable now for bad review situation. If there are, you're benefiting from review manipulation games. So
Mhm.
absolutely, 100%. And they're on Amazon big time. I mean, they did the whole antitrust. They're the antitrust enforcers, right? So they're the ones who are antitrust enforcing Amazon. So you better believe your claims better be, what you say your product does, it better do. I
So
mean,
so
the
with
USDA, organic, right? How many people love to say organic cotton, organic this, right? The US EPA, we've seen it all. Like, there's not an organization that doesn't. It's just knowing, and I think what sometimes surprises people is like, I didn't realize my product was subject to that regulation. I had no idea. I just thought I was making like a sprayer gun for a hose. I didn't realize that that had to be EPA regulated. So sometimes that's the issue, is just getting, because so much of Amazon, if you think about it historically, I mean, one of the hardest things, I think, I don't know if the legal community owes the world an apology, but like people are afraid of lawyers for some reason in this world. Like they really don't want, like nobody thinks it's a good idea to like just pick up the phone and talk to a lawyer before you go to market. That's what I've noticed.
hey, let's not overcomplicate it, right? No, you're
Right?
right.
Like, why would I need a lawyer for? I can Google it. I
I
can
go
Google it.
50,
And Google is,
I just go to
right?
LegalZoom. They'll tell me.
Yeah, they'll tell you everything, and it's like, and so if we did something to you, if some lawyer burned you, like, I mean, we have a program now called Seller Basics where it's like literally for $99, we'll get on the phone with you for 15, 20 minutes, have a call. If there's more work to be done, it's discounted. I mean, we're trying to make it as easy as possible because so much of where our clients get hurt is preventable. And we just think that an ounce of prevention is what this world needs. But even that's a hard sell. That's a
Oh,
hard sell
it
sometimes.
is super
It's like,
hard. The people would rather cut corners and then find out that their ship has leaking holes all over it while they're in the ocean at a stormy sea instead of like double
right.
checking before they leave the dock, right? So I totally
With a
get
twenty
that.
dollar fix when you're at the dock, and it's pretty much, and sometimes,
Yeah.
especially with like FDA, it's like an impossible fix if you're at sea. Like you're going down. Like
Oh,
it's rough.
100%. Yeah.
So
With
it's
with Amazon taking more liability and now acting as a store, at least calling themselves a store, does that give sellers some inherent like automatic rights with Amazon? Like, does them taking on more responsibility there also give the seller more protection, or not really? Is it still we're both
well, no,
in
because
this together?
Amazon still expects you to indemnify them and hold them harmless. So I mean, Amazon obviously is the first layer of attack, right? Like Amazon gets sued more often. We're seeing, right? So a lot of our clients are coming to us because Amazon's getting sued. And it's not that they're getting sued, but Amazon's like, you're going to tender to us, right? Offer tender to us, which basically means you're going to hold us harmless. You're going to indemnify us for any losses here, right? Which is why they also have the insurance mandate, right? They actually make sure prove you actually have to have insurance with Amazon named as a beneficiary, as a named insured, right?
Mhm.
So I'll actually tell you a cynical story as to why
I
Amazon wants
love
to be the
cynical
store.
stories.
All right. So one thing about me is when the subcommittee did their investigation of Amazon's business practices back in 2019, 2020, their final report, which came out, I think, in 2020, we were the number one site. I was basically the number one cited person in the report. So we basically took all the stories and struggles that our clients had told us over the years and compiled them into like a storybook and gave it to the FTC. And it was the most quoted resource in their report on Amazon's business practices. We had members of Congress literally reading our emails on TV. It was back in 2021. It was pretty crazy when all this antitrust stuff was pretty big. So we know a thing or two about this whole Amazon antitrust thing. But the reality is the reason why Amazon likes being a store is really comes down to, and it is kind of obvious to me why this is, and it's not so obvious to the government because again, they're always a few steps behind. But I think about a store like that you shop at regularly, like Target, Walmart, Costco. You ever been to Costco?
Oh yeah.
Okay. What's the name of their store brand? Kirkland, right?
Yeah.
So when Amazon gets accused of competing against sellers as a marketplace, right? You abused your position of power as a marketplace and used the data you had to compete against other sellers. It sounds pretty awful. But when Amazon rebuts and says, but we're really just like a store and not a marketplace, and we didn't abuse our power, we just did what every other store does, which is create a store brand, which is sanctioned retail behavior that's great for the consumer and has been sanctioned and beloved by the FTC since the dawn of time, right? In other words, we didn't compete against our sellers. We just created the Kirkland brand, aka Seller Basics. Sorry,
Right.
Amazon Basics. Excuse me. That's the reality. Like a lot of what the government wants to do, the reason why the government wants to break up Amazon revolves around the notion that Amazon is a marketplace, right? That it is sort of marketplace that offers infrastructure, all these a la carte services that you can buy. Amazon's contention is actually, if you look at us holistically, it's just a store like any other store. We're actually not that big unless you're planning to like take Walmart's distribution centers and like tear them apart and spin them off into a separate company. I suggest you leave us alone. So that's actually Amazon's legal strategy, if you in a nutshell.
What are your thoughts on that? So, in terms of Amazon being broken up, do you think that is a real possibility, or do you think Amazon's defense will hold up? That hey, look, we're a store, we're not trying to compete against our sellers, or maybe I guess if they are being their own brand, they're okay with competing against their sellers, but like Costco does it, so why not us too, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the idea that they compete against their own sellers has always been a bit of a red herring because if you look at the data, it's tremendously small. Like, yeah, did it happen? Probably. Should it have happened? Probably not. Were there some bad actors? Yeah. But if you were to look at the data, like how much money Amazon makes on private label, it's so minimal compared to, through third
Oh,
party sellers that it's hard
I,
to
I
argue.
actually I heard them shutting down some of their Amazon basics because they couldn't compete against their own private labelers.
Exactly, because they can't use the right. I'm not going to take credit, but there was some PhD student who was doing this huge study, and he told me that once you back out batteries, the numbers become pathetically insignificant. Immaterial is the fancy term for that. So, what I think Amazon likes the dialogue of, oh, you competed against our sellers because one, it's very polarizing for Congress to just throw that out there. But at the end of the day, if they need to pull the plug on it at any given moment, they can just show the data. Be like, really, and we know people who were hurt by it. So, like, I don't want to belittle, I don't want to like make light of the fact that I know people who were hurt by Amazon's direct competition with them. I'm just saying it's not the biggest issue. As far as breaking them up, I don't know. I mean, I was the one who I wrote an article in CNN, got misinterpreted, but
Shocking.
yeah, yeah. But I wrote, I
Journalists
wrote an
quoting stuff.
op-ed, and then by the time I went through the editorial process, it ended up the title was like "Prime should be free for everyone." I didn't mean free for every user. I meant free for every retailer. And so basically, what I preached was this new Shopify model that Amazon launched, where basically Shopify sellers you can do buy with Prime. I basically preached like that would be one way to help like undo the harm because Amazon got a lot of unfair advantages when they were building out their network. A lot of unfair because I used to negotiate those advantages, so like I know them very well. But the
Mhm.
ones Amazon got were kind of like really anti-competitive because like a typical tax incentive for building out like a warehouse is like maybe you don't pay some income tax, maybe certain stuff inside that that you used to build it are tax free. But what Amazon got was the right to remain tax free. So like for example, it goes back to the sales tax issue. It's really fascinating. Like if you're really nerdy about this stuff, it's fascinating. But if you have to understand why doesn't Amazon want to collect sales, like why is it so important for Amazon not to collect sales tax on the marketplace? It's because their stuff is cheaper, right? So if you're buying a MacBook Air and you have the choice to buy it from Amazon or the Apple store in your town, and it's like 2011, where are you going to buy it from? You're more likely to buy it from Amazon because you're going to save, 7 to 10% depending on your state, right? Sometimes it's even
Mhm.
more, right? That's a huge savings and it's a huge incentive. And there's a lot of research because I used to deal with this at Walmart all the time that shows how much that sales tax drove consumer behavior. The ability to shop tax free was an important catalyst for Amazon. And Bezos spoke about it in the original book, Everything Store. There were some quotes about it. the ability to be a tax-free marketplace was really important. So that wasn't easy for Amazon to let go of, but they also needed to build warehouses in every state. And once they built warehouses, they knew they would lose that advantage right away. So they kind of negotiated special treatment, like we're going to be tax-free, even though we're physically operating a warehouse in your state. And to me, that was the pill that's hard to swallow because it's a little bit too far. Because that's like picking a winner, you know? If
Yeah.
if the
Very
state, if
small
the state of
anecdote, but when I was growing up in Alaska, there's no sales tax in Alaska. So I
right,
can
no man,
definitely say you're correct. If there was sales tax versus no sales tax, I would take the no sales tax deal every time. And when I first left Alaska and discovered this thing called sales tax, I was just like angry all the time. Like, none of this is the real price. So yeah, you're
that
in terms of consumer spending, you're spot on.
yeah, especially for like bigger picture. And this is what was happening. So people were using, they call this freeloading in trade circles, right? Like they would use the salespeople at the local camera store, but then they could buy it on Amazon for 10% less on their phone. And if it's an expensive purchase, I mean, of course, you're motivated, right? You're going to save
Right.
20, $30. I mean, sure, why not? So that was real. So to analogize this, let's say Subaru makes a deal with the state of New Jersey and says, we're going to build a giant Subaru manufacturing facility here in New Jersey. And in exchange for that, you're going to allow us to sell our cars to consumers tax free. What consumer in New Jersey would buy a Honda at that point?
Yeah,
Right? Because
exactly.
the comparable Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla, right, would have sales tax, but the Subaru would not. So you're saving on a $20,000 vehicle quite a lot of money.
Is this
So
still
you
the
can
case
see
for
how that could
Amazon? Are
be
they still tax free?
not really. They finally the laws. We did a lot of lobbying and got the laws changed so that they actually now the way the rules work is Amazon is the tax collector in just about every state. I think maybe
I
still
see.
holding out like a pointless state like Kansas. Not I love Kansas. Don't get me wrong. I used to live in Arkansas, but I think there's like I mean in terms of materiality, like not your biggest state, but
Yeah,
in just about every state now, Amazon is required to be the tax collector in its marketplace store, so to speak. It is officially the store now for tax purposes. But I mean,
I
so
see.
to me, that's never what tax incentives were about. Like, it's one thing to say, hey, like I'll develop this warehouse in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was previously like a toxic waste dump, and turn it into something in exchange for no property taxes, versus I can sell products to your customers in your state tax free while my competitors can't. That's just unfair.
Right.
So Amazon's gains were a little outside the norm of, and I think again, I don't think the regulators fully thought through what they were doing, but this was real. Like they were really doing this. They were saying like we have transcripts of discussions where Amazon said to Wisconsin, they said, if you don't go along with the position that we're tax free even after our warehouse in Waukesha is built, we're not going to build it here. We're going to build it in Illinois next door. So they were playing that game with
Oh
these
yeah,
states.
I could see that. I think they're still playing that game with their new corporate center that they just recently opened up, like right
Well,
before
they
they
did that.
started
That was
cutting.
another one too, but that was settled in
Yeah.
Virginia, and they tried to do it in New York. They tried to do like a twofer, where like, okay, we're going to have three headquarters now. I'm like, why don't you make every state headquarters? But
Who's going to be
they
giving
actually
the
borrowed
tax
that.
incentive?
They actually borrowed that playbook from GE. That was actually our playbook. We did the same thing when we wanted to move our headquarters out of Connecticut. We went state to state and negotiated, but never in a million years did I think the opportunity to say like, hey, we can sell jet engines like, tax free, and Pratt Whitney can't. Because boy, if we could do that, that would change the airline industry tremendously. Everyone would be flying a
For sure.
GE engine, right? Like that was
I,
never on the table.
I want to circle back down to the actual FBA source. This might be a very easy to answer question. I'm not sure because obviously I'm not a lawyer, but if I was an e-commerce seller starting up my e-commerce brand, is it more complicated? Like, is there more potential legal complications or advantages if I went through a program like Amazon's FBA program versus, say, me starting up my own Shopify store? If I'm selling from just my own store, it could be Magento, whatever. Like, is it the same kind of legal risk, or is there more or less?
Um, it's interesting you say that. So there's more legal risk, I think, and less depending on what subject matter. So, for example, let's take sales tax. Okay, the sales tax laws are still really messed up, right? Like there's still this belief that small businesses making less than 100 grand a year should register in 50 states and be subject to 12,000 state, local, township jurisdictions because it really is
Hmm.
sadly that many, right? Like, in Colorado, you'd have to file 70 tax returns, right? Income tax,
Oh.
sales tax, actually more than that, probably 150, right? For one state. So you can't afford to do it. Like if you're a small business, like unless you're making, quite a lot of money, like you really can't afford to do it. Even if you're making millions, it's expensive. Like you've got to hire a team of people to be on top of it because it's not just filing, it never ends. So from that perspective, if you can do substantial sales, we've noticed there are a lot of Amazon sellers who refuse to sell on Shopify. Shopify is like the Xerox of, I use the word, like, remember how people use the word Xerox for copy machine? I say
Hmm.
Shopify, I mean, on your own website. So there's a lot of people who, for that reason, they don't want to go out and register for every state, and they don't want to take sales tax risk because you could have sales tax exposure starting as low as 200 transactions in some states according to their laws, which are still up for challenge. But that's what the written is. So the idea is, okay, well, why don't I do this? Why don't I have a website and I'll just refer the sale back to Amazon? So that way Amazon collects the sales tax. So there are some people who are really afraid of the tax regulations that choose not to grow on Shopify. Aside from that, it's a tough question. If you're inheriting an Amazon, so like for example, here's the problem. If you do something wrong and Amazon's a party to the lawsuit, like it's more likely going to be harder to deal with because of the fact that Amazon's a party, because the lawyer isn't really going after you, they're going after Amazon. But if you're required to hold Amazon harmless, then it becomes harder. So there's sort of like Amazon effect of like sometimes selling on Amazon can be more dangerous. Whereas if you sell on your own website, you may not be as much of a target for these things that in the first place because you're not the seller. Prop 65, for example. Prop 65 is a rule in California that says certain products you sell have to have this disclaimer that the chemicals involved may cause cancer. And the way it works is if you're under 10 employees, you're not subject to the law. Just caveat, this is not legal advice. Just explain how things work. You need one
Buy
real
the
bit of advice.
$99 fee before you do
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, not even just call a lawyer. You feel free to give us a call. But like, it's just we're just chatting. But okay, so Prop 65 is this environmental law in California. Now here's the problem. So you may not be subject to it because you're less than 10 employees, but Amazon, as the quote unquote retailer, is. So if they get nailed with the Prop 65 violation, then you end up paying more than you ever normally would have, had it just been you by yourself. I think there's give and take. The other one I love is that, and sometimes just having both sucks. Like, here's one. This is like, okay, classic. Have you heard about these ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act lawsuits? These are huge.
I think I know where you're going with this, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. So like, there's a couple of lawyers out there who basically go after these websites. A lot of them are small businesses, and they have like a person who's blind as their plaintiff, and the person will say, "Well, your website isn't compliant with disability standards. Your pictures didn't narrate a description. Whatever those standards are, and because of that, you have to fix it. And oh, by the way, you have to pay my attorney's legal fees, which are quite expensive. So you can
Yeah.
easily walk away, $25,000-$30,000 poor in one of those
So this is
cases.
this is a terrible case of something I know. I want to call them friends, acquaintances, people I know in the SEO space, and they have some programming knowledge. They basically build a tool that goes out and like scrape websites that are not ADA compliant, and then like will
Yeah,
give them as like paid lead gen to the lawyers. But they'll like contact the website first before they'll give it to the lawyer. Like, hey, I can fix your website. So
right.
otherwise, if you don't pay me my fixing fee, then I'm going to give this to this lawyer. So it's like
So it's sort of
it's,
like
it's
extortion. Yeah, I
terrible. It's
guess.
like being
Terrible.
shaken up by the mafia. I absolutely hate
Right.
all that. But yeah.
Well, I would recommend everybody who has a website and originally, I thought there was a lot of favorable law pointing away from accountability for small websites. Whether again, another unanswered court case, and this is why it sucks. This is why, again, the global small business owner has no help. And this is why we created a nonprofit, is because we want to fight these cases. Like, there's a court case to be had about whether a small business on a Shopify website really has nexus in 50 states, right? There was a recent case involving Ford Motor Company that kind of where the court sort of hinted at that there is a real difference between being a small Shopify owner and being Ford Motor Company. And the problem is nobody from the small Shopify owner space has really brought a case forward to the court to get questions answered. But there may be defenses at the state law level. The problem we had, though, is that at the federal level, the Biden administration has officially, I'm not being political, I might as well be Canadian for purposes of politics. I just stay out of it. We have clients on both sides who just don't. But they just basically said that a website is a place of public accommodation. So kind of killing the prior court arguments that looked like it was trending. We were trending towards a place where the courts were saying, well, hey, this is a really old law. And when it said, like physical place of public accommodation, we're talking about like places like where you need a ramp or an elevator, not websites. Right. And the Justice Department has unfortunately taken a position that, and again, it's like there's no standard, there's no easy way to do it. My thought is, the website platform such as Shopify should just be on top of that and really be informing you about that. And maybe that'll be.
It sounds like I want to get into selling e-com business questions as well, but it sounds like if you go onto Shopify, you might be at less risk just because you're less of a target. If you're on Amazon, you get all the benefits of Amazon, but you get some of the risks there as well, where you might be sharing the blame or not indemnifying Amazon or whatever. So that makes sense to me. I want to get into some questions specifically about selling an e-commerce business with your expertise. The
last thing I want to say before we do that, though, is just what I've noticed is insufficient insurance policies. Check your insurance. Ask those questions. Like, why? Like, whoever sold you your insurance policy, call them up right now and ask them, like, hey, if I got sued for Prop 65 in California, would I be covered? And the answer is no. Then, like, what do I need to be covered? Is it E&O? What do I need? Errors and omissions? Hey, if I got sued for not having disabled on my insurance, like the insurance policies, I'm finding are lacking. So that's my last bit of advice, like to the community, is to close that out. Is no matter what you do, like check your policies, because that's supposed to be your first line of defense for these kinds of things.
And just real quick for anyone out there, because we get people who are brand new, who are starting their FBA business for the first time. Briefly describe what that insurance is. Like, what is it called? How did they go find it? What is it?
Well, you need business insurance, right? So you're going to need an insurance policy that offers at least $1 million of liability coverage for you. And that oftentimes, if you're selling on Amazon, you have to name Amazon as additional insured. And that's just basically to cover you in case the product hurts somebody, right? Those are the main, right, strict liability policy. But there's this other policy, and it's usually called errors and omissions, which basically covers your mistakes, which might be like failing to, as the officer of the company, failing to make your website ADA compliant or failing to put a Prop 65 warning. It's often missing from the insurance, right? So in other words, don't go with the cheapest. Just ask your broker, like in writing. My friend got
a leaky boat.
Yeah. Because it's just so much easier, and they actually pay for your lawyer. That's the better. Then that's the better benefits. Like then they pay for your lawyer. Right. So it's like because part of like for example, the ADA, part of it's you got to pay your lawyer and you got to pay their lawyer. So it's like you actually can't get damages. Like the person who's injured, the claim injured, the person who's blind who says I couldn't read your website, they don't have any rights to anything. It's just you got to pay their legal bills, and you got to pay your legal bills. So the insurance company can take care of that. So if you have the right policy, so I would definitely say get your policy checked and make sure.
Good. That's good pragmatic advice. Switching over into actually selling in business,
selling business.
The M&A component of all of this. How does hiring a legal expert, like obviously I'm very well aware of this with what we do, but for our listeners out there, how does hiring someone like you, for example, help them when it comes to selling their business?
So it's a very good question. So what you guys do very well, in my opinion, is you guys go out there, and not just you. I'm not specifically endorsing. We can't specifically endorse, but we did a lot of.
Sorry, we'll edit this to where you're specifically endorsing us.
Yeah.
Or we'll talk to yours.
Yeah. So what our role in the process is, in my opinion, is a couple things. One is to explain the transaction to the client. So first things first, we've got to explain to you the transaction. Now you already know the transaction. Like, hey, I'm selling my business for $1 million. Yeah, but there's some complications, right? Like, how long are you going to stay on for? What's expected of you, right? But in addition to that, every contract for the sale of a business, for the most part, is going to have a bunch of promises that you're going to make about the condition of your business, about the state of your business. And those really need to be negotiated carefully and with a fine tooth comb, because if they're not, those are the things that can kind of come back to bite you. So, like, what I always tell my clients is, what we really are doing here is like, you've already negotiated the price. Unfortunately, until we get through due diligence, we can't negotiate the risk. And that's why usually what happens is there's a due diligence period. As that comes to a close, that's usually when we'll see a first draft of a purchase agreement. Because again, for the purposes of Amazon sellers and aggregators, we took a position early on that we only wanted to represent the sellers and we didn't want to represent the aggregators. We wanted to be kind of conflict free in the whole thing. We wanted to be as pro seller as possible. So I'm speaking totally from a pro seller perspective. We do represent buyers all the time, just not aggregator buyers. But the idea is like there's this whole risk profile of your business that hasn't been negotiated. And that's kind of our job. And well, let me put it this way. It's our job to first explain the risk profile that, you're potentially assuming. And then based on the instructions you provide to us, we have to then negotiate. So for example, a first draft of an agreement to sell your business might say something like, if anything goes wrong with the business, anything at all, you're going to hold us harmless and you're going to pay us back for any losses we incur. That includes, for example, if the Amazon account goes down for any reason whatsoever, even if it's our own fault, right? Literally, the agreement might say, you're guaranteeing us a sure thing. I mean, I've read some pretty horrible agreements over the span of my life doing this, right? And some really rough first. And a lot of times these are just first drafts. So they're taking, like the idea is like any negotiation, right? The first offer is going to be very heavy towards the person making the offer, right? Then the counter offer, a couple rounds of renegotiation, and eventually we somewhere, hopefully in the middle, right? Or, even closer to your favor, you come to an agreement. But that's what we're doing. I always say we're kind of like your risk navigators because I think that's what we help you. First, we want to make sure that the contract honors the spirit and intent of the letter of intent, the spirit and intent of the letter of intent, I guess you could say it that way, honors the spirit of the letter of intent. How about that? We want to make sure the contract honors the spirit of the letter of intent, but we also want to make sure that you understand the risk that you're undertaking that goes along with a deal. That's rarely ever hashed out in a letter of intent. In fact, it's too early to do so.
In terms of the agreement, so you mentioned you're pretty seller focused, and we're pretty seller focused too. In fact, off air, we were talking about our agreement that is like basically baked into our marketplace that you guys ended up using for one of your deals, which, like I said, our lawyers are going to be very happy to hear that was a thing that happened.
Yeah,
But
subject to some adjustments, but we
right,
yeah, we
yeah,
like this is definitely. Well, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you want to publicly say that it's good for the seller, but yeah,
No, yeah, no,
because then
that's
nobody will ever use
we
it
try
again. But I
to.
mean, yeah, I mean, like your people were probably expecting me just to like get all like lawyery about it, but I look, you know
That's
what?
usually how it happens. But
But
man,
like
we
looking at the
try
labor
to make that
perspective,
be beneficial to the seller because I don't know if you will agree with me on this, but I do feel like a lot of times like if it's a normal buyer, it's almost never really a big issue. But if it's an aggregator that's coming and buying someone's FBA business, they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves with what they want, what they are trying to do, all this kind of stuff. Like we've seen in one case an earnout where the seller was over the moon with the earnout, and we told him you should not accept this deal because we know that the aggregator also knows that the business is not going to reach its ability to grow to ever have to pay out that earnout. So they offered it as a way to convince the seller to come on over,
right?
knowing that they would never even have to pay this thing, right? Because most likely they wouldn't have to pay it. But in your opinion, is this true? Like, do you see aggregators trying to be a little bit, using their own usually much more vast experience of M&A knowledge to put the deal in their favor versus the seller?
Yeah, 100%. You've got paranoid private equity lenders and investors who absolutely want this deal in their favor. And sometimes, as the seller, you have to accept it. Like sometimes, all I can do is say, "That's the deal you're getting, and that's what you got to deal with. Either take the deal or don't." But that's what they're offering. Like they're not going any more than that, right?
Hmm.
But 100%, very different than like you said, like somebody who's like, "Hey, this is a cool business. I want to get to work. I'm cool with your terms. Click clack, a couple adjustments. Here we go. Bing bang boom. We're off to the races, right?" Like that's a very different person. Private equity backed aggregators, their investors want to be protected. We did a deal with one aggregator. I'm trying to think of when last year, and it was one of the few instances where they actually did a couple deals with this aggregator. The law firms were getting progressively like, these were all law firms I knew from my prior life working for really big companies. So like $1 billion deal type law firms, right? And here we're
Mhm.
doing this multi-million-dollar deal, and I'm just like, aren't your legal bills going to be more than this deal? I mean, these law firms are like they just don't, they didn't fit. Like they like this doesn't fit, right? Like it's bringing a tank to a knife fight. Do you know what I mean? Like it didn't make any sense.
Right.
But I knew why, because their investors were paranoid and they were, of course, typical big law, 12 lawyers on every, they had 12 lawyers on every phone call. Just every comma, period, semicolon was negotiated, was hours and days of negotiation.
It's not bringing a
Finally got
tank
the
to a
deal
knife fight.
closed.
It's bringing the whole army.
Yeah, it just didn't fit. Like this is like, come on, guys, this is like represented the risk profile of the investor behind the aggregator, and that to us, I think that was what surprised people the most was like how little control the aggregator had over some of this stuff. Like their terms of lending required some of these things to be this way, and they were pretty harsh. And your
Yeah.
story about the big earnout, I mean, look, man, I told every client, I said, like, I love these people who like, you know, like, clients like they offered me 5x cash and 1.5x in potential earnout. And he's like, but my friend on Facebook posted an LOI and he got a 12x. And I'm like, yeah, but it's like 2x cash and 10x. Like, so basically they're buying the
Yeah.
business with your own future money. I'm like, that's an idiotic. I mean, we always coach our clients to be very heavily focused on the closing cash. Like, that's the only guaranteed cash. In fact, we used to always say, like, $1 of closing cash is, call it $1. Call it worth $1. So when you value an offer, anything else like an earnout, you got to put like some type of qualifier on that. So maybe that's 20 cents on the dollar at best. So if the deal is 5 million in closing cash and 3 million in potential earnout, that's really 5.6 million, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to put reality in the situation. The fact that it's a guaranteed note doesn't matter if they don't have the money. That was the other thing I was trying to explain to them. Is a couple
Yeah.
points. It's like if they run out of money, there's nothing guaranteed about it. They can't pay you because they're not the federal government. They can't just print money, right? Like they run out of money, and that's been happening.
The one thing about that always shocks me. So I come from the real estate background a little bit. My dad owns a real estate brokerage, and like he used to tell me contracts are great because they help you win the legal battle maybe 50% of the time. If you don't have it, you're just screwed, but you might win if you have it. So like when
Yeah,
people think like, oh, but they promised to pay me over like 18 months, like, well, yeah, they could promise you the moon. Like, they doesn't mean they're going to do it. And they might
yeah,
win even if you have the
yeah.
contract in your favor, right? Like they might
Right.
still win. Like I now, knock on wood, we've been very good on earnouts. Like the vast majority of ours have been paid out if anyone
That's
does it.
good to
But like,
hear. We're
yeah,
seeing we're seeing mixed bags. We're seeing some are going to court, some are going to threatening to court. I saw this is in my client, but I saw Seller X was publicly sued recently in October. And like the
yeah,
same thing. The other problem is, and I tell my clients is, the cost to litigate, right? Like if you deal, I'm like litigating. So we're not a litigation heavy firm. We rarely ever will go to court, take our clients, like because the global small business doesn't belong in a courtroom. And I have to explain to my clients, like you can be right in principle, but it costs a lot of money. Like justice is expensive in this country. It ain't free. It's
that is
really
the
expensive,
clippable quote right there. Justice is
right?
expensive.
In this country, it is, right? It's very
Yeah.
expensive. So like if your earnout is 300 grand, and are you going to risk three, four, 500 grand of your own money in litigation costs? And if you lose, by the way, you've got to pay their litigation costs to get that
Yeah,
300
that's a
grand
huge
or whatever.
chunk of your entire business for an average FBA
Right. I mean,
person
like,
with
would
like
you
a
ever
$2
risk?
million business. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, they already have a moat. I'm like, any payment beyond the closing cash, they already have a moat called the cost of justice or the hazards of litigation, the cost of litigation, which is very high in M&A. It's the highest probably out of most things. It's one of the highest litigation costs there could be if you were to really go to
I could
court
believe it.
over it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you can't bank on the contract terms. Like I can write you the best contract terms in the world, but it doesn't matter. They literally don't have to. They just don't have to pay you. They can literally just
Yep.
say, "Too bad, so sad," and you have no recourse. So I'm always like, make sure that closing cash is good for you. Like I like when
Absolutely.
earnouts get paid. Like we always want, we want happy endings, and like I don't mean to be a downer, but I'm like, What I need to know from you as my client is that if you don't get paid that earnout, if that earnout doesn't get paid to you, are you going to go jump off the Brooklyn Bridge? Because if that's how you feel, then this ain't the deal for you, right?
100%. I always
Right?
tell
If you,
sellers you should have the like your hard threshold and soft threshold, like or your minimum price threshold is what I call it. Like, what are you willing to accept on the deal? Where if this is all you got, you could walk away happy that you did the deal. And I agree with you. I think that minimum threshold should be primarily the cash offer, the upfront cash portion of it. Like if that's not good enough for you to be happy with, then it might not be a good enough deal for you. Would be what I
yeah,
would do
I
to
mean,
someone.
but to your point, like I think we're playing in sort of like thresholds, like to be happy, you can be a little muffed. Okay, so maybe 10% more is what would have made you happy, but you lost out on that
Mhm.
10%. You're gonna kick a few rocks. You're gonna be pissed off. You're not gonna jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, and that was my test. It's like you can't jump off. Like you could imagine, like if you really thought you were gonna get like 20 million for your business, you end up getting two because the rest was an earnout, right? Like
Right.
you can see
Yeah,
how that could emotionally affect somebody.
for
So it's like
sure.
it's always like
Absolutely.
that's always what I was trying to like make sure my clients understood. I don't want to find out one day that this earnout was meant the world to you, because then you got to negotiate differently. Like it's got to
Yeah.
mean not that much to you. Otherwise, we're not doing the right deal.
This is another anecdote, but for anyone out there listening, this is the exact type of reason why, whether you want to sell privately or not, you should talk to someone like us at EF and someone like Paul, like just to get the right expectations of what you're trying to do here with your exit. Because this is a high stress thing, for at least for most sellers, is a
Oh,
highly emotional charged thing on the buyers. If the aggregators like bring them on in, like for the seller, this is like your whole net worth a lot of the time. So it's definitely
it's
worthwhile to have
everything
these
you've
phone
done.
calls.
It's your life's work. It's the most important, aside from like marriage and children. It's probably going to be the most important transaction thing you'll ever do in your life, unless you do it again, right?
100%.
Which we hope you do.
Yeah.
But until you do it again, it's going to be your game changing story, right? Like, that's huge.
So
And you want to
I
do it
want
right. You
to.
don't want it to turn into a nightmare.
So we're coming towards the end of the podcast, but before I get into the rapid fire questions, Paul, do you have any last minute tips for e-commerce sellers when it comes to negotiating with buyers?
I think be honest with yourself, right? Like you mentioned, like should you go private or should you go with a broker? Be honest with who you are. Okay. Like one of those badass dudes from like $1 million listing New York your whole life, and you can do it. Like, okay, maybe there's a case to be made for going private. Doing it yourself. Like if you're like that kind of, I can handle that heavy. But a couple things. If somebody approaches you, like you need to go to market. You need to work with somebody who's going to take you to market, get multiple offers. Okay. That's the first key to negotiation. Negotiating one on one is a bad answer. I saw some less than reputable brokers do this, like where they just would negotiate one of this, and that used to piss me off because they had some really good brands, and I'm like, that would really annoy me. So make sure you're going to market and be honest with yourself. If you're not that person, then yeah, you need somebody in your corner fighting for you. So do that. I think lawyer up early, because I think, not to toot my own horn, but we review the broker contracts too. We want to make sure those are good. Some broker contracts are not great. Some broker contracts are a little unfavorable. You want to make sure the broker contracts are good too. But yeah, negotiation is a process, and it's good to have people in your corner. It's good to have people that you can talk it through with, that you can absolutely run scenarios with. And I think it's good. It's good to have a bunch of people in your team when you go through something like this. Just don't buy into the hype that this is, oh, we're done in 30 days and this is some quick. This is not like buying a house in New Jersey. This is very complicated. Okay. This is nothing like that. I think that's the key takeaway. There's a lot to
Yeah.
negotiate, more than just the price. And people are always very surprised what they learn in the process, is what I find, about how much of a process it really is. And that promise of like, closing, you'll get the contract, will close in 24 hours is, that answer a lot of times. So
100%. Yeah, just to follow on top of what you said there, then we'll get into the rapid fire questions. We had a story of a guy, he was negotiating one on one, got an offer, I think it was $1.4 million. And that included an earnout. So I think like it was 1 million up front and 400K paid out over a period of time. Then he came to us and we're like, whoa, we could sell this for way more, right? So we get them onto the marketplace. We end up selling that exact same business. I think we ended up selling it for 2.3, it might have been 2.1 or 2.3 million dollars. But he got 1.8 million up front. So like just his upfront amount was bigger than the entirety of the deal if he had done private. And like that's not saying like, oh, EF was so good or anything, but that was the power of multiple offers. Like You mentioned the brokers that are like try to only show it to one person. Like we've had those deals on the back end where buyers like, hey, let me see the deals before they go live on the marketplace. Send them to me first, like to a preferred buyer list, which is kind of what you're talking about there, which we think is really shitty for sellers because then you don't get the full exposure of the entire market looking at you and competing for you, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, that is a super good tip.
we had a broker who was doing that. They were not disclosing, and it was like we were screaming at the client because they had one of the coolest brands and products we'd ever seen, and we knew why they didn't want it because it was like once this thing hit the market, it was going to go bonkers.
Oh yeah.
But it's just like it sucks. Like I just like to see, you want to get a couple eyes on it. We had clients who would get approached directly by the aggregators, would go find them on Amazon and just approach them directly. Clearly, they wouldn't do their research. If somebody get approached and be like, "Oh, we're not interested in you," I'm like, "Clearly, your data mining is
Oh
terrible."
yeah. It's all
Like,
data mining, cold email at
yeah,
scale.
you thought you were a $20 million seller, and the guy's like, "I'm like a $200,000 seller." He just started
They both have
like,
twos, they both have zeros.
yeah, exactly. Just wrong
Stay the
amount of
same.
commas. But yeah, I mean, I always, and sometimes look, the number was nice, the multiple was in a reasonable range, and the seller was ready to go. They're just like, you know what, it's enough money to set me up. But I was never a fan of it. I was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't take much to have somebody come in and get you a better deal. I mean, you can always negotiate a contract that if the deal ain't, if somebody like an Empire Flippers couldn't get you much a better deal, then the commission would be appropriate, would be different. Like there's ways to like negotiate it, but like I always say, like you should always go out and see like selling your house, like to the first bidder before you go to market. Like, like somebody shows up
Right.
to your house and says, I want to buy it. It's like, I guess you could do it. Sometimes it happens, right? But I don't know.
It's almost always better to get multiple offers. And then you can play them off of each other too. And like who knows, maybe
Right.
that first offer is really the best one, but it usually doesn't hurt to go and see if that's true or not.
Exactly. Play them off of each other. The rounds of negotiation, right? You're missing that
Yeah,
whole sort of
yeah.
round of negotiation. So
Right. Let's move into the
speed
rapid
round.
fire questions here, Paul. Just first answer that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. In your view, what is the best hidden growth opportunity for the e-commerce industry today? Like, what can an e-commerce store owner really double down on today?
Wow, that's a really, I don't know.
I know the answer.
I
You
don't,
want me to help you out this one?
yeah, help me.
So, for my dear listeners out there, go to our show notes, click to Paul's website, and pay $99 to have a legal consultation. That's probably I think that's probably a pretty good move.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought I misunderstood the question. Yeah, please join Seller Basics and definitely yes. For less than $3 a month, you can have a lawyer on call. Your suspensions people are charging $5,000 a month for suspended accounts, and we're covering you for less than $3 a month after tax deductions. It's nonsense. I totally
Right, and
misunderstood the question. But yeah, now that you've said it that way, it makes perfect sense. SellerBasics.com is the way to go.
And just to be clear, Paul definitely paid me $20,000 to say that. So just want to be open. Paul doesn't know he's paying me $20,000 for that yet, but this is my like hard pitch for that. So we'll get the
You're the
details
SEO guy.
figured out here.
Look, there's a market in SEO for lawyers like me because every lawyer in the SEO market's like, well, what do you want to pitch? Like Madison, Wisconsin? I'm like, the world. Like I have
I,
clients. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm like, I do intellectual property law. Like I have no physicality. I'm like, my clients are all over the world and they sell in the United States. Like, how do I do that? Like, I mean, I probably just got your wheelchair in there, but that might be an after call. But I mean, it's like every person who comes to me as a law, not that Seller Base is not a law firm, but anyone in this space of like, service providers and like what we do, it typically used to dealing with regional folks. So it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I know exactly the SEOs you're talking about there. A lot of those guys are my friends who are cold pitching those lawyers.
I'm
Let's
like,
move to the
yeah,
second
I'm not a
question.
motorcycle injury lawyer. Like, it's not the same thing. Not what I
Yeah.
do.
So, in your view, what tools or resources can e-commerce entrepreneurs use to build up their legal defenses, or just get more knowledge outside of the seller basic stuff that we just talked about?
I think Seller Basics is the best way to do it, but I think it's this is going to sound crazy, but like read Amazon's terms of service, read the seller code of conduct, read the intellectual property policy, read the review policy. Actually, read them. I mean, a lot of the solutions to the problems we find, honestly, I mean, I'm going to give away the secret sauce here. Like a lot of like the suspensions that are not complicated, a lot of times it's just you're not reading them. You're not reading these things. Just read them. Read these things. They're not actually that long. I'm not talking about the giant terms of services, but just like the IP policy, the seller code of conduct, the review policies, just read them. I think those are great
Yeah.
resources. And that
Very,
work with
very dry
lawyers,
reading, but probably really powerful. Yeah.
just read it for yourself. They're not long. And you might realize you're making a few violations and that might preempt some suspensions. But the other option is, of course, we have free account health reviews with Seller Basics. So schedule account health call.
So, final question for you, Paul. What has been your funniest moment since working with online business owners?
My funniest moment. That's
The
a
real
tough
hard
question.
question. The real hard questions here, Paul.
That's a tough one because I try to laugh every day. I love comedy. And I think the one that comes to mind involves products that probably were sort of inappropriate. Can I tell this story or is it going to get me? I'm going to get in trouble.
But it depends how inappropriate, but we'll edit it out if it's too inappropriate, I guess.
I can tell in the way where I can tell without telling. But it was like the day where it woke me up to something that I didn't realize. I'm helping out a lot of people. Like I've got a lot of clients here. My clients sold product for adults to enjoy. Is that fair? Can I leave it at that?
I'm assuming you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, but yes, go ahead.
Yes, and we were talking about doing some corporate asset protection strategies because my client was nervous about the products. And I said, "What do you mean nervous?" He said, "Well, people plug my product into a wall and then they use it for their enjoyment. You better believe I'm worried about asset protection." And I was just like, I don't know. I'm like, this was one of the most eye-opening things, and it was like, and then just the products as a whole. Like, I mean, it's just like there's so many funny products, and you have to keep a straight face. Like those moments like that are so common, where it's like, look, I respect my client made millions of dollars selling the product, but I mean, holy buckets, like what the heck is this thing? And those moments are just fun, and they're fun clients. And when your client has a sense of humor about it with you, I think it's the best, when they're just like,
Yeah.
and it's like you can laugh at it too, but like, you know, good for
There's
them.
been so many times where like an EF employee will be like on their social media or whatever. Like it's the most embarrassing if it's on their laptop because like the bigger screen, and the retargeting ads will kick in. And we get so many businesses that we're all looking at all the time. So it's like weird lingerie ads, strange
Yeah.
Instagrams showing up, all sorts of like random stuff you would never think of.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. And that's kind of like our clients. Like our clients are like retargeting ads. Like you just never know what they're selling. They're like, I sell this. And it's like that first moment when you just really have to keep a straight face and like remember that you're an adult now. Those are priceless moments though. I just,
The
and then
beauty of the internet is the ability to get wealth on the most niche, weirdest, or obscure
nothing but praise,
thing you could
nothing
ever
but
think of.
respect, nothing
Yeah,
but love and respect for as long as you're not
that's
hurting
awesome.
anybody and nobody's dying. Like, good for you. But it's
So,
just
Paul,
always fun.
if someone wanted to connect with you, maybe ask you some questions or check out what you're doing with the Basics program, where's the best place for someone to go and follow you and connect with you?
Paul at ecom.law is my law firm. Ecom, it's ecom.law. And then if you want to learn about the Seller Basics program, it's sellerbasics.com. Just like it sounds, sellerbasics.com. And, it's a cool program. Sign up. It's $99 a month. And there's no contracts. Like you can literally sign up, schedule a call with me, my team. Like that's good enough for me and quit. And that's $99. We may not let you come back. Like you might be like, that's kind of rude, but we don't do contracts. We're not like the phone carriers. We really try to make it an easy decision for people to join. And, like I said, it's a cool program. So I'd definitely check out Seller Basics and schedule an account health review with one of my team members and have it check out. That is totally separate from our law firm, but it's a cool program that I like. And it's our way of kind of just, saying enough with the $5,000 suspensions, enough of kicking people when they're down. Like we're tired of that business. I hate that business model. Like as a lawyer, I'm all about like trying to like profit from people who are successful, not from their misery. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like
100%.
that's why I love MMA because you're a part of the most important, like one of the happiest events of their lives outside of marriage and child. And some could argue maybe even more exciting than marriage and child. I don't know. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be the one to say that, but depending on, but no, for me, no. But for others, you never
Awesome.
know.
We'll
So,
put all those links in the show notes down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description. same thing with the podcast, wherever you get your podcast. So, Paul, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. It's been a whirlwind. It's been quite a trip down memory lane too. So appreciate that.
Oh, glad to
Thank you.
have you
Thank you.
on. Yep.
Appreciate it.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.